stuffed with accumulated ideas. Dyson was a craftsman who loved all the detail and the technique of his work intensely, and if, as has been hinted, he deluded himself a little with the name of artist, yet his amusements were eminently harmless, and so far as can be ascertained, he or the publishers had chosen the good part of not tiring the world with printed matter. Here, then, Dyson would shut himself up with his fancies, experimenting with words and striving, as his friend the recluse of Bayswater strove, with the almost invincible problem of style, but always with a fine confidence extremely different from the chronic depression of the realist. He had been almost continuously at work on some scheme that struck him as well-nigh magical in its possibilities since the night of his adventure with the ingenious tenant of the first floor in Abingdon Grove, and as he laid down the pen with a glow of triumph, he reflected that he had not viewed the streets for 5 days in succession. With all the enthusiasm of his accomplished labor still working in his brain, he put away his papers and went out, pacing the pavement, at first in that rare mood of exaltation which finds in every stone upon the way the possibilities of a masterpiece. It was growing late, and the autumn evening was drawing to a close amidst veils of haze and mist, and in the stilled air the voices and the roaring traffic and incessant feet seemed, to Dyson, like the noise upon the stage when all the house is silent. In the square, the leaves rippled down as quick as summer rain, and the street beyond was beginning to flare with the lights in the butcher's shops and the vivid illumination of the greengrocer. It was a Saturday night, and the swarming populations of the slums were turning out in force. The battered women in rusty black had begun to paw the lumps of cagmag, and others gloated over unwholesome cabbages, and there was a brisk demand for 4 ale. Dyson passed through these night fires with some relief. He loved to meditate, but his thoughts were not as De Quincey's. After his dose he cared not 2 straws whether onions were dear or cheap, and would not have exulted if meat had fallen to 2d. a pound. Absorbed in the wilderness of the tale he had been writing, weighing nicely the points of plot and construction, relishing the recollection of this and that happy phrase, and dreading failure here and there, he left the rush and the whistle of the gas flares behind him, and began to touch upon pavements more deserted. He had turned, without taking note, to the northward, and was passing through an ancient fallen street, where now notices of floors and offices to let hung out. But still about it there was the grace and the stiffness of the age of Whigs, a broad roadway, a broad pavement, and on each side a grave line of houses with long and narrow windows flush with the walls, all of mellowed brickwork. Dyson walked with quick steps, as he resolved that short work must be made of a certain episode, but he was in that happy humor of invention, and another chapter rose in the inner chamber of his brain, and he dwelt on the circumstances he was to write down with curious pleasure. It was charming to have the quiet streets to walk in, and in his thought he made a whole district the cabinet of his studies, and vowed he would come again. Heedless of his course, he struck off to the east again, and soon found himself involved in a squalid network of grey 2-storied houses, and then in the waste void and elements of brickwork, the passages and unmade roads behind great factory walls encumbered with the refuse of the neighbourhood, forlorn, ill-lighted, and desperate. A brief turn, and there rose before him the unexpected, a hill suddenly lifted from the level ground, its steep ascent marked by the lighted lamps, and eager as an explorer, Dyson found his way to the place, wondering where his crooked paths had brought him. Here all was again decorous, but hideous in the extreme. The builder, someone lost in the deep gloom of the early 20s, had conceived the idea of twin villas in grey brick, shaped in a manner to recall the outlines of the Parthenon, each with its classic form broadly marked with raised bands of stucco. The name of the street was all strange, and for a further surprise the top of the hill was crowned with an irregular plot of grass and fading trees called a square, and here again the Parthenon motive had persisted. Beyond the streets were curious, wild in their irregularities, here a row of sordid, dingy dwellings, dirty and disreputable in appearance, and there, without warning, stood a house genteel and prim, with wire blinds and brazen knocker, as clean and trim as if it had been the doctor's house in some benighted little country town. These surprises and discoveries began to exhaust Dyson, and he hailed with delight the blazing windows of a public house, and went in with the intention of testing the beverage provided for the dwellers in this region, as remote as Libya and Pamphylia and the parts about Mesopotamia. The babble of voices from within warned him that he was about to assist at the true parliament of the London workman, and he looked about him for that more retired entrance called private. When he had settled himself on an exiguous bench and had ordered some beer, he began to listen to the jangling talk in the public bar beyond. It was a senseless argument, alternately furious and maudlin, with appeals to Bill and Tom and mediaeval survivals of speech, words that Chaucer wrote belched out with zeal and relish, and the din of pots jerked down and coppers rapped smartly on the zinc counter made a thorough base for it all. Dyson was calmly smoking his pipe between the sips of beer when an indefinite-looking figure slid rather than walked into the compartment. The man started violently when he saw Dyson placidly sitting in the corner, and glanced keenly about him. He seemed to be on wires controlled by some electric machine, for he almost bolted out of the door when the barman asked with what he could serve him, and his hand shivered as he took the glass. Dyson inspected him with a little curiosity. He was muffled up almost to the lips, and a soft felt hat was drawn down over his eyes. He looked as if he shrank from every glance, and a more raucous voice, suddenly uplifted in the public bar, seemed to find in him a sympathy that made him shake and quiver like a jelly. It was pitiable to see anyone so thrilled with nervousness, and Dyson was about to address some trivial remark of casual inquiry to the man, when another person came into the compartment, and laying a hand on his arm, muttered something in an undertone, and vanished as he came. But Dyson had recognized him as the smooth-tongued and smooth-shaven Burton, who had displayed so sumptuous a gift in lying, and yet he thought little of it, for his whole faculty of observation was absorbed in the lamentable and yet grotesque spectacle before him. At the first touch of the hand on his arm, the unfortunate man had wheeled round as if spun on a pivot, and shrank back with a low, piteous cry, as if some dumb beast were caught in the toils. The blood fled away from the wretch's face, and the skin became grey, as if a shadow of death had passed in the air and fallen on it, and Dyson caught a choking whisper, "Mr. Davies! For God's sake, have pity on me, Mr. Davies! On my oath I say," and his voice sank to silence as he heard the message, and strove in vain to bite his lip and summon up to his aid some tinge of manhood. He stood there a moment, wavering as the leaves of an aspen, and then he was gone out into the street, as Dyson thought silently, with his doom upon his head. He had not been gone a minute when it suddenly flashed into Dyson's mind that he knew the man. It was undoubtedly the young man with spectacles, for whom so many ingenious persons were searching. The spectacles indeed were missing, but the pale face, the dark whiskers, and the timid glances were enough to identify him. Dyson saw at once that by a succession of hazards he had unawares hit upon the scent of some desperate conspiracy, wavering as the track of a loathsome snake in and out of the highways and byways of the London cosmos. The truth was instantly pictured before him, and he divined that all unconscious and unheeding he had been privileged to see the shadows of hidden forms, chasing and hurrying, and grasping and vanishing across the bright curtain of common life, soundless and silent, or only babbling fables and pretenses. For him, in an instant, the jargoning of voices, the garish splendor, and all the vulgar tumult of the public house became part of magic, for here before his eyes a scene in this grim mystery play had been enacted, and he had seen human flesh grow grey with a palsy of fear. The very hell of cowardice and terror had gaped wide within an arm's breadth. In the midst of these reflections, the barman came up and stared at him, as if to hint that he had exhausted his right to take his ease, and Dyson bought another lease of the seat by an order for more beer. As he pondered the brief glimpse of tragedy, he recollected that with his first start of haunted fear, the young man with whiskers had drawn his hand swiftly from his greatcoat pocket, and that he had heard something fall to the ground, and pretending to have dropped his pipe, Dyson began to grope in the corner, searching with his fingers. He touched something and drew it gently to him, and with one brief glance, as he put it quietly in his pocket, he saw it was a little old-fashioned notebook, bound in faded green morocco. He drank down his beer at a gulp and left the place, overjoyed at his fortunate discovery, and busy with conjecture as to the possible importance of the find. By turns he dreaded to find perhaps mere blank leaves, or the laboured follies of a betting book, but the faded morocco cover seemed to promise better things, and hint at mysteries. He piloted himself with no little difficulty out of the sour and squalid quarter he had entered with a light heart, and emerging at Gray's Inn Road, struck off down Guildford Street, and hastened home, only anxious for a lighted candle and solitude. Dyson sat down at his bureau and placed the little book before him. It was an effort to open the leaves and dare disappointment. But in desperation at last he laid his finger between the pages at haphazard, and rejoiced to see a compact range of writing with a margin, and as it chanced 3 words caught his glance and stood out apart from the mass. Dyson read, "The Gold Tiberius," and his face flushed with fortune and the lust of the hunter. He turned at once to the first leaf of the pocket-book, and proceeded to read with rapt interest the history of the young man with spectacles. From the filthy and obscure lodging situated, I verily believe, in one of the foulest slums of Clerkenwell, I indite this history of a life which, daily threatened, cannot last for very much longer. Every day, nay every hour, I know too well my enemies are drawing their nets closer about me. Even now I am condemned to be a close prisoner in my squalid room, and I know that when I go out I shall go to my destruction. This history, if it chance to fall into good hands, may perhaps be of service in warning young men of the dangers and pitfalls that most surely must accompany any deviation from the ways of rectitude. My name is Joseph Walters. When I came of age, I found myself in possession of a small but sufficient income, and I determined that I would devote my life to scholarship. I do not mean the scholarship of these days. I had no intention of associating myself with men whose lives are spent in the unspeakably degrading occupation of editing classics, befouling the fair margins of the fairest books with idle and superfluous annotation, and doing their utmost to give a lasting disgust of all that is beautiful. An abbey church turned to the base use of a stable or a bakehouse is a sorry sight, but more pitiable still is a masterpiece spluttered over with the commentator's pen and his hideous mark CF. For my part, I chose the glorious career of scholar in its ancient sense. I longed to possess encyclopedic learning, to grow old amongst books, to distill day by day and year after year the inmost sweetness of all worthy writings. I was not rich enough to collect a library, and I was therefore forced to betake myself to the reading room of the British Museum. O dim, far-lifted and mighty dome, Mecca of many minds, mausoleum of many hopes, sad house where all desires fail. For there men enter in with hearts uplifted, and dreaming minds, seeing in those exalted stairs a ladder to fame, in that pompous portico the gate of knowledge, and going in, find but vain vanity, and all but in vain. There, when the long streets are ringing, is silence, there eternal twilight, and the odor of heaviness. But there the blood flows thin and cold, and the brain burns adust. There is the hunt of shadows, and the chase of embattled phantoms, a striving against ghosts, and a war that has no victory. O dome, tomb of the quick, surely in thy galleries where no reverberant voice can call, sighs whisper ever, and mutterings of dead hopes, and there men's souls mount like moths towards the flame, and fall scorched and blackened beneath thee. O dim, far-lifted and mighty dome! Bitterly do I now regret the day when I took my place at a desk for the first time and began my studies. I had not been an habitué of the place for many months when I became acquainted with a serene and benevolent gentleman, a man somewhat past middle age, who nearly always occupied a desk next to mine. In the reading room it takes little to make an acquaintance, a casual offer of assistance, a hint as to the search in the catalogue, and the ordinary politeness of men who constantly sit near each other. It was thus I came to know the man calling himself Dr. Lipsius. By degrees I grew to look for his presence, and to miss him when he was away, as was sometimes the case, and so a friendship sprang up between us. His immense range of learning was placed freely at my service. He would often astonish me by the way in which he would sketch out in a few minutes the bibliography of a given subject, and before long I had confided to him my ambitions. "Ah," he said, "you should have been a German. I was like that myself when I was a boy. It is a wonderful resolve, an infinite career. I will know all things. Yes, it is a device indeed, but it means this, a life of labor without end, and a desire unsatisfied at last. The scholar has to die, and die saying, I know very little." Gradually, by speeches such as these, Lipsius seduced me. He would praise the career, and at the same time hint that it was as hopeless as the search for the philosopher's stone, and so by artful suggestions, insinuated with infinite address, he by degrees succeeded in undermining all my principles. After all, he used to say, the greatest of all sciences, the key to all knowledge, is the science and art of pleasure. Rabelais was perhaps the greatest of all the encyclopedic scholars, and he, as you know, wrote the most remarkable book that has ever been written. And what does he teach men in this book? Surely the joy of living. I need not remind you of the words, suppressed in most of the editions, the key of all the Rabelaisian mythology, of all the enigmas of his grand philosophy, vives joyeux. There you have all his learning. His work is the institutes of pleasure as the fine art. The finest art there is the art of all arts. Rabelais had all science, but he had all life too. And we have gone a long way since his time. You enlightened, I think you do not consider all the petty rules and bylaws that a corrupt society has made for its own selfish convenience as the immutable decrees of the eternal youth. Such were the doctrines that he preached, and it was by such insidious arguments, line upon line, here a little and there a little, that he at last succeeded in making me a man at war with the whole social system. I used to long for some opportunity to break the chains and to live a free life, to be my own rule and measure. I viewed existence with the eyes of a pagan, and Lipsius understood to perfection the art of stimulating the natural inclinations of a young man hitherto a hermit. As I gazed up at the great dome, I saw it flushed with the flames and colors of a world of enticement, unknown to me. My imagination played me 1,000 wanton tricks, and the forbidden drew me as surely as a lodestone draws on iron. At last my resolution was taken, and I boldly asked Lipsius to be my guide. He told me to leave the museum at my usual hour, 4:30, to walk slowly along the northern pavement of Great Russell Street, and to wait at the corner of the street till I was addressed, and then to obey in all things the instructions of the person who came up to me. I carried out these directions, and stood at the corner looking about me anxiously, my heart beating fast, and my breath coming in gasps. I waited there for some time, and had begun to fear I had been made the object of a joke, when I suddenly became conscious of a gentleman who was looking at me with evident amusement from the opposite pavement of Tottenham Court Road. He came over and, raising his hat, politely begged me to follow him, and I did so without a word, wondering where we were going and what was to happen. I was taken to a house of quiet and respectable aspect in a street lying to the north of Oxford Street, and my guide rang the bell, and a servant showed us into a large room, quietly furnished, on the ground floor. We sat there in silence for some time, and I noticed that the furniture, though unpretending, was extremely valuable. There were large oak presses, 2 bookcases of extreme elegance, and in one corner a carved chest which must have been mediaeval. Presently Dr. Lipsius came in and welcomed me with his usual manner, and after some desultory conversation my guide left the room. Then an elderly man dropped in and began talking to Lipsius, and from their conversation I understood that my friend was a dealer in antiques. They spoke of the Hittite seal and of the prospects of further discoveries, and later, when 2 or 3 more persons had joined us, there was an argument as to the possibility of a systematic exploration of the pre-Celtic monuments in England. I was in fact present at an archaeological reception of an informal kind, and at 9 o'clock, when the antiquaries were gone, I stared at Lipsius in a manner that showed I was puzzled, and sought an explanation. As we passed up the stairs, Lipsius lighting the way with a hand lamp, I heard the sound of a jarring lock and bolts and bars shot on at the front door. My guide drew back a baize door, and we went down a passage, and I began to hear odd sounds, a noise of curious mirth, and then he pushed me through a second door, and my initiation began. I cannot write down what I witnessed that night. I cannot bear to recall what went on in those secret rooms, fast shuttered and curtained, so that no light should escape into the quiet street. They gave me red wine to drink, and a woman told me as I sipped it that it was wine of the red jar that Avalonius had made. Another asked me how I liked the wine of the fawns, and I heard a dozen fantastic names, while the stuff boiled in my veins and stirred, I think, something that had slept within me from the moment I was born. It seemed as if my self-consciousness deserted me. I was no longer a thinking agent, but at once subject and object. I mingled in the horrible sport, and watched the mystery of the Greek groves and fountains enacted before me, saw the reeling dance, and heard the music calling as I sat beside my mate, and yet I was outside it all, and viewed my own part an idle spectator. Thus with strange rites they made me drink the cup, and when I woke up in the morning I was one of them, and had sworn to be faithful. At first I was shown the enticing side of things. I was bidden to enjoy myself and care for nothing but pleasure, and Lipsius himself indicated to me as the acutest enjoyment the spectacle of the terrors of the unfortunate persons who were from time to time decoyed into the evil house. But after a time it was pointed out to me that I must take my share in the work, and so I found myself compelled to be in my turn a seducer, and thus it is on my conscience that I have led many to the depths of the pit. One day Lipsius summoned me to his private room and told me that he had a difficult task to give me. He unlocked a drawer and gave me a sheet of typewritten paper and had me read it. It was without place or date or signature, and ran as follows: Mr. James Headley, FSA, will receive from his agent in Armenia on the 12th inst. A unique coin, the Gold Tiberius. It hears on the reverse a fawn, with the legend Victoria. It is believed that this coin is of immense value. Mr. Headley will come up to town to show the coin to his friend, Professor Mimes of Cheney Street, Oxford Street, on some date between the 13th and the 18th. Dr. Lipsius chuckled at my face of blank surprise when I laid down this singular communication. You will have a good chance of showing your discretion, he said. This is not a common case. It requires great management and infinite tact. I am sure I wish I had a Panurge in my service, but we will see what you can do. But is it not a joke? I asked him. How can you know, or rather, how can this correspondent of yours know that a coin has been dispatched from Armenia to Mr. Headley? And how is it possible to fix the period in which Mr. Headley will take it into his head to come up to town? It seems to me a lot of guesswork.
I went away in some perturbation. He had no doubt designedly left everything in mystery, and I did not know what part I should have to play. Though I had assisted at scenes of hideous revelry, I was not yet dead to all echo of human feeling, and I trembled lest I should receive the order to be Mr. Headley's executioner. A week later, it was on the 16th of the month, Dr. Lipsius made me a sign to come into his room. It is for tonight, he began. Please to attend carefully to what I am going to say, Mr. Walters, and on peril of your life, for it is a dangerous matter. On peril of your life, I say, follow these instructions to the letter. You understand? Well, tonight at about 7:30 you will stroll quietly up the Hampstead Road till you come to Vincent Street. Turn down here and walk along, taking the third turning to your right, which is Lambert Terrace. Then follow the terrace, cross the road and go along Hertford Street, and so into Lillington Square. The second turning you will come to in the square is called Sheen Street, but in reality it is more a passage between blank walls than a street. Whatever you do, take care to be at the corner of this street at 8 o'clock precisely. You will walk along it, and just at the bend, where you lose sight of the square, you will find an old gentleman with white beard and whiskers. He will in all probability be abusing a cabman for having brought him to Sheen Street instead of Cheney Street. You will go up to him quietly and offer your services. He will tell you where he wants to go, and you will be so courteous as to offer to show him the way. I may say that Professor Mimi's moved into Cheney Street a month ago, thus Mr. Headley has never been to see him there, and moreover he is very short-sighted and knows little of the topography of London. Indeed, he has quite lived the life of a learned hermit at Audley Hall. Well, need I say more to a man of your intelligence? You will bring him to this house, he will ring the bell, and a servant in quiet livery will let him in. Then your work will be done, and I am sure done well. You will leave Mr. Headley at the door and simply continue your walk, and I shall hope to see you the next day. I really don't think there is anything more I can tell you. These minute instructions I took care to carry out to the letter. I confess that I walked up the Tottenham Court Road by no means blindly, but with an uneasy sense that I was coming to a decisive point in my life. The noise and rumor of the crowded pavements were to me but dumb show. I revolved again and again in ceaseless iteration the task that had been laid on me, and I questioned myself as to the possible results. As I got near the point of turning, I asked myself whether danger were not about my steps. The cold thought struck me that I was suspected and observed, and every chance foot passenger who gave me a second glance seemed to me an officer of police. My time was running out, the sky had darkened, and I hesitated, half resolved to go no farther, but to abandon Lipsius and his friends forever. I had almost determined to take this course when the conviction suddenly came to me that the whole thing was a gigantic joke, a fabrication of rank improbability. Who could have procured the information about the Armenian agent, I asked myself. By what means could Lipsius have known the particular day and the very train that Mr. Headley was to take? How engage him to enter one special cab amongst the dozens waiting at Paddington? I vowed it a mere Milesian tale, and went forward merrily, and turned down Vincent Street, and threaded out the route that Lipsius had so carefully impressed upon me. The various streets he had named were all places of silence and an oppressive cheap gentility. It was dark, and I felt alone in the musty squares and crescents where people pattered by at intervals, and the shadows were growing blacker. I entered Sheen Street and found it, as Lipsius had said, more a passage than a street. It was a byway. On one side a low wall and neglected gardens and grim backs of a line of houses, and on the other a timber yard. I turned the corner and lost sight of the square, and then to my astonishment I saw the scene of which I had been told. A hansom cab had come to a stop beside the pavement, and an old man carrying a handbag was fiercely abusing the cabman, who sat on his perch the image of bewilderment. "Yes, but I'm sure you said Sheen Street, and that's where I brought you," I heard him saying as I came up, and the old gentleman boiled in a fury and threatened police and suits at law. The sight gave me a shock, and in an instant I resolved to go through with it. I strolled on, and without noticing the cabman, lifted my hat politely to old Mr. Headley. "Pardon me, sir," I said. "Is there any difficulty? I see you are a traveler. Perhaps the cabman has made a mistake. Can I direct you?" The old fellow turned to me, and I noticed that he snarled and showed his teeth like an ill-tempered cur as he spoke. "This drunken fool has brought me here," he said. "I told him to drive to Cheney Street, and he brings me to this infernal place. I won't pay him a farthing, and I meant to have given him a handsome sum. I am going to call for the police and give him in charge." At this threat, the cabman seemed to take alarm. He glanced round as if to make sure that no policeman was in sight, and drove off grumbling loudly, and Mr. Headley grinned savagely with satisfaction at having saved his fare, and put back 1 and 6pence into his pocket, the handsome sum the cabman had lost. "My dear sir," I said, "I am afraid this piece of stupidity has annoyed you a great deal. It is a long way to Cheney Street, and you will have some difficulty in finding the place unless you know London pretty well." "I know it very little," he replied. "I never come up except on important business, and I've never been to Cheney Street in my life." "Really? I should be happy to show you the way. I have been for a stroll, and it will not at all inconvenience me to take you to your destination." "I want to go to Professor Mimi's at number 15. It's most annoying to me. I'm short-sighted, and I can never make out the numbers on the doors." "This way, if you please," I said, and we set out. I did not find Mr. Headley an agreeable man indeed. He grumbled the whole way. He informed me of his name, and I took care to say, "The well-known antiquary," and thenceforth I was compelled to listen to the history of his complicated squabbles with publishers who had treated him, as he said, disgracefully. The man was a chapter in the irritability of authors. He told me that he had been on the point of making the fortune of several firms, but had been compelled to abandon the design owing to their rank ingratitude. Besides these ancient histories of wrong and the more recent misadventure of the cabman, he had another grievous complaint to make. As he came along in the train, he had been sharpening a pencil, and the sudden jolt of the engine as it drew up at a station had driven the penknife against his face, inflicting a small triangular wound just on the cheekbone, which he showed me. He denounced the railway company and heaped imprecations on the head of the driver and talked of claiming damages. Thus he grumbled all the way, not noticing in the least where he was going, and so inamiable did his conduct appear to me that I began to enjoy the trick I was playing on him. Nevertheless, my heart beat a little faster as we turned into the street where Lipsius was waiting. 1,000 accidents, I thought, might happen. Some chance might bring one of Headley's friends to meet us, perhaps, though he knew not Cheney Street. He might know the street where I was taking him. In spite of his short sight, he might possibly make out the number, or in a sudden fit of suspicion, he might make an inquiry of the policeman at the corner. Thus every step upon the pavement as we drew nearer to the goal was to me a pang and a terror, and every approaching passenger carried a certain threat of danger. I gulped down my excitement with an effort and made shift to say pretty quietly, "No, 15, I think you said? That is the third house from this. If you will allow me, I will leave you now. I have been delayed a little, and my way lies on the other side of Tottenham Court Road." He snarled out some kind of thanks, and I turned my back and walked swiftly in the opposite direction. A minute or two later I looked round and saw Mr. Headley standing on the doorstep, and then the door opened and he went in. For my part I gave a sigh of relief and hastened to get away from the neighborhood and endeavored to enjoy myself in merry company. The whole of the next day I kept away from Lipsius. I felt anxious, but I did not know what had happened or what was happening, and a reasonable regard for my own safety told me that I should do well to remain quietly at home. My curiosity, however, to learn the end of the odd drama in which I had played a part stung me to the quick, and late in the evening I made up my mind to go and see how events had turned out. Lipsius nodded when I came in and asked me if I could give him 5 minutes' talk. We went into his room and he began to walk up and down, and I sat waiting for him to speak. "My dear Mr. Walters," he said at length, "I congratulate you warmly. Your work was done in the most thorough and artistic manner. You will go far. Look." He went to his escritoire and pressed a secret spring, and a drawer flew out, and he laid something on the table. It was a gold coin, and I took it up and examined it eagerly and read the legend about the figure of the faun. "Victoria," I said, smiling. "Yes, it was a great capture which we owe to you. I had great difficulty in persuading Mr. Headley that a little mistake had been made. That was how I put it. He was very disagreeable and indeed ungentlemanly about it. Didn't he strike you as a very cross old man?" I held the coin, admiring the choice and rare design, clear-cut as if from the mint, and I thought the fine gold glowed and burned like a lamp. "And what finally became of Mr. Headley?" I said at last. Lipsius smiled and shrugged his shoulders. "What on earth does it matter?" he said. "He might be here or there, or anywhere, but what possible consequence could it be? Besides, your question rather surprises me. You are an intelligent man, Mr. Walters. Just think it over, and I'm sure you won't repeat the question." "My dear sir," I said, "I hardly think you are treating me fairly. You have paid me some handsome compliments on my share in the capture, and I naturally wish to know how the matter ended. From what I saw of Mr. Headley, I should think you must have had some difficulty with him." He gave me no answer for the moment, but began again to walk up and down the room, apparently absorbed in thought. "Well," he said at last, "I suppose there is something in what you say. We are certainly indebted to you. I have said that I have a high opinion of your intelligence, Mr. Walters. Just look here, will you?" He opened a door communicating with another room and pointed. There was a great box lying on the floor, a queer coffin-shaped thing. I looked at it and saw it was a mummy case like those in the British Museum, vividly painted in the brilliant Egyptian colors with I knew not what proclamation of dignity or hopes of life immortal. The mummy, swathed about in the robes of death, was lying within, and the face had been uncovered. "You are going to send this away?" I said, forgetting the question I had put. "Yes, I have an order from a local museum. Look a little more closely, Mr. Walters." Puzzled by his manner, I peered into the face while he held up the lamp. The flesh was black with the passing of the centuries, but as I looked I saw upon the right cheekbone a small triangular scar, and the secret of the mummy flashed upon me. I was looking at the dead body of the man whom I had decoyed into that house. There was no thought or design of action in my mind. I held the accursed coin in my hand, burning me with a foretaste of hell, and I fled as I would have fled from pestilence and death, and dashed into the street in blind horror, not knowing where I went. I felt the gold coin grasped in my clenched fist and threw it away, I knew not where, and ran on through by-streets and dark ways, till at last I issued out into a crowded thoroughfare and checked myself. Then, as consciousness returned, I realized my instant peril and understood what would happen if I fell into the hands of Lipsius. I knew that I had put forth my finger to thwart a relentless mechanism rather than a man. My recent adventure with the unfortunate Mr. Headley had taught me that Lipsius had agents in all quarters, and I foresaw that if I fell into his hands he would remain true to his doctrine of style and cause me to die a death of some horrible and ingenious torture. I bent my whole mind to the task of outwitting him and his emissaries, 3 of whom I knew to have proved their ability for tracking down persons who for various reasons preferred to remain obscure. These servants of Lipsius were 2 men and a woman, and the woman was incomparably the most subtle and the most deadly. Yet I considered that I too had some portion of craft, and I took my resolve. Since then I have matched myself day by day and hour by hour against the ingenuity of Lipsius and his myrmidons. For a time I was successful, though they beat furiously after me in the covert of London. I remained perdue, and watched with some amusement their frantic efforts to recover the scent lost in 2 or 3 minutes. Every lure and wile was put forth to entice me from my hiding place. I was informed by the medium of the public prince that what I had taken had been recovered, and meetings were proposed in which I might hope to gain a great deal without the slightest risk. I laughed at their endeavors, and began a little to despise the organization I had so dreaded, and ventured more abroad. Not once or twice, but several times, I recognized the 2 men who were charged with my capture, and I succeeded in eluding them easily at close quarters, and a little hastily I decided that I had nothing to dread and that my craft was greater than theirs. But in the meanwhile, while I congratulated myself on my cunning, the 3rd of Lipsius's emissaries was weaving her nets, and in an evil hour I paid a visit to an old friend, a literary man named Russell, who lived in a quiet street in Bayswater. The woman, as I found out too late a day or 2 ago, occupied rooms in the same house, and I was followed and tracked down. Too late, as I have said, I recognized that I had made a fatal mistake and that I was besieged. Sooner or later I shall find myself in the power of an enemy without pity, and so surely as I leave this house I shall go to receive doom. I hardly dare to guess how it will at last fall upon me. My imagination, always a vivid one, paints to me appalling pictures of the unspeakable torture which I shall probably endure, and I know that I shall die with Lipsius standing near and gloating over the refinements of my suffering and my shame. Hours, nay minutes, have become very precious to me. I sometimes pause in the midst of anticipating my tortures to wonder whether even now I cannot hit upon some supreme stroke, some design of infinite subtlety to free myself from the toils. But I find that the faculty of combination has left me. I am as the scholar in the old myth, deserted by the power which has helped me hitherto. I do not know when the supreme moment will come, but sooner or later it is inevitable, and before long I shall receive sentence, and from the sentence to execution will not be long. I cannot remain here a prisoner any longer. I shall go out tonight when the streets are full of crowds and clamors, and make a last effort to escape. It was with profound astonishment that Dyson closed the little book and thought of the strange series of incidents which had brought him into touch with the plots and counterplots connected with the Gold Tiberius. He had bestowed the coin carefully away, and he shuddered at the bare possibility of its place of deposit becoming known to the evil band who seemed to possess such extraordinary sources of information. It had grown late while he read, and he put the pocketbook away, hoping with all his heart that the unhappy Walters might even at the 11th hour escape the doom he dreaded.